All right, hello. This is review number 7, and we are going to be covering one late Northern Renaissance work, the French, Dutch, Spanish, English Baroque, and Colonial America. All right, so early colonial America. All right, so we're looking at our one late Northern Renaissance work. And so this was made well into the Renaissance. So remember that it was artists like Albert Dürer who traveled from Italy back north and took ideals and ideas and concept of the Renaissance north. But there's definitely a different flavor when you're talking about the Renaissance in Italy versus the Renaissance in the north. So our example here is by an artist named Bruegel. Bruegel is a painter who paints a lot of genre scenes. We refer to scenes of everyday life kind of as a genre scene. This is Hunters in the Snow. It's very flat, almost all cool. Well, it's mostly cool color scheme, a little bit of warm there on the left. It has an emphasis on diagonals. This was part, we know, of a series, and the series had 6 pieces, and the 6 pieces kind of told through the seasons of the year. And so each piece covered 2 months. So this is obviously winter. Typical of the Northern Renaissance to see a work that has good morals, nothing that is scandalous. He's creating a work that is highlighting the Netherlands and its beauty, but it's not actually true. Like as we look at it, you can tell that he's not painting from life. Instead, he's taking all these different sketches he's made from different villages, different towns, different travels, right? Like the Alps here in the background, and he's composing it into a really thought out, really intentionally composed image, right? So he's putting this together from some other scenes. Neighbors are building something. Sorry about that. All right. Genre, talked about this being a genre art. Again, it's part of the kind of seasonal depiction. These were collected by wealthy businessmen in the Netherlands. Lots of effort put into the details. There is some attention to texture in the details, like as you look at, the wood, the bricks, but it doesn't have the full rendering of detail like we expect in the early Renaissance work, thinking about Jan van Eyck and the Arnolfini portrait, right, where every little detail is fully three-dimensional or looks as three-dimensional as possible, fully modeled. This doesn't have that, right? Like these silhouettes feel very flat. And so if we compare these two works, which happened around the same time period, you can see a very different flavor in the Italian Renaissance with Raphael versus the Northern Renaissance with Bruegel. All right, French Baroque. French Baroque art is, remember when we talked about Baroque as being propaganda, Baroque art is propaganda in Italy for the Catholic Church, right? It's part of that counter-Reformation. It's countering the Protestant Reformation from the North, right? Highlighting the Catholic art. In every other country that we look at Baroque art, it's more about kind of a virtuoso approach to art or about power and authority. It's not, it can still have propaganda, but it's propaganda for the king, right? Or the wealthy class. It's not propaganda for the church, right? That's going to be strictly Italian Baroque. So here we are in France, we're looking at propaganda for the king, right? So Louis Couture, Louis XIV, is the one who really makes a name for himself as an absolute monarch. Okay. In fact, he said, I am the state, right? So that's kind of how he viewed his role of government. Louis XIV transformed the Palace of Versailles from a small hunting lodge to the meandering, sprawling, but very orderly palace we see today in the town of Versailles. So this is outside of Paris. Louis Laveau and Jules Ardouin Mansart are architects, and we talked about how they approached everything with this need to glorify the king and affirm his right to rule. And so all the Louis, like from Louis the Ninth to what past Napoleon, use this site, right? So it's been very important. If it's not a seat of government all the time, because at times it was a retreat, at times it was a museum, at times it was totally shut down, right, during the Revolution, but it was initially kind of conceived as a palace. So classical inspired, right? We can see classical columns. We see barrel arches and post and lintel. We see what we kind of read as classical statuary, this kind of classical portico here, this porch area. It has the reason and symmetry of the classical, but it has the extra decoration of Baroque. So the gold, the statues on top with these kind of like kind of exploding floral forms, the extravagance, the opulence, those are things that should make you think Baroque. The Gold Gate there at the front has been rebuilt, and it is very impressive, quite impressive. His official portrait that we saw, remember the Versailles, kind of a series of small rooms that were all about the king's rituals and daily ceremonies. Remember, he had the lever and the coucher, where he would, his rising and his going to sleep at night were all big productions. His meals were big productions. This is all about kind of glorifying him as the leader. And so it's opulent. Now it still has a play off the circle and square, but it's going to be an exaggeration. By Bernini. A Hall of Mirrors. College Board gives you that as one of the facets to know. Propaganda about the king. Remember, his bedroom's right here, and it faces east, and so he called himself the Sun King, so the sun rose with him. The gold, right, is the color of the sun, just like we saw with the Incan, and so it's reflecting that idea of his leadership. And actually there's a big sun here on the clock, kind of up above his bedroom. He is the government, right, the center of the government, so all of this is going to be about him. And the gardens were a big part of the site as well. So man controlling the natural world. All right, Rubens. I still think Rubens, he just has not been on the AP exam. And I just feel like he is past due to be on the AP exam. So Rubens is a French Baroque style painter. I'm sorry, not French, Flemish, but he's painting in France. So he was the one who would create work for large numbers of large works for people. And so we know he had a lot of help in the studio, right? His work is going to focus on sensuality, color, right? He is the guy that kind of gets color going as a focus, right? Color over line. And so Delacroix looks to Rubens as his color influence. He's also the one who was a diplomat, and so he would kind of work projects between different kings while also painting for them, and so he was involved in a lot of important activities. And he did also create work that was counter-reformation, so he also is creating some work that is propagandistic for the Catholic Church. He was influenced by Titian, influenced by Michelangelo, Raphael, Da Vinci, Caravaggio. He paints kind of these full-figured women, lots of emphasis on flesh. And our work by Mr. Rubens, Sir Peter Paul Rubens, is Henry IV receives a portrait of Marie de Medici. So Marie de Medici is one of the queens who has descended from the Medici family in Florence. The whole cycle of 24 paintings, right? These giant, like 14-foot paintings, 24 of them were made for the Luxembourg Palace, where Marie de Medici lived. Now, remember, she had been, her husband had died at this point that these were made. So Henry IV was her husband, right? King of France. And so this is painting in after his death. So he had died. She had been she'd lost her social position. And so to help reestablish herself as important, she commissioned Rubens to make these 24 paintings about her life. The problem was, remember, her life wasn't that interesting. So he had to make, which was fine for him because he was good at elaborating the story. So he makes these really grandiose scenes. So for example, in this piece, we have Zeus and Juno looking down upon Henry as he is being presented with the image of Marie de Medici that the angels are holding up. And then France is behind Henry, pushing him into this marriage, right? So Marie de Medici being Italian, and then this is an alliance with the French. And so all the symbolism here is really over the top, which is what we expect with Baroque. Again, one of 24 paintings. It is propagandistic for the aristocracy here, just like we saw with Louis Couture at Versailles. He believed strongly, Rubens did, that you need to have an understanding of ancient statues to paint bodies correctly. All right, so let's move into the Dutch Baroque. The Dutch Baroque is their golden age, man. This is when they really shined. They're creating, this is kind of the perfect storm for them because their innovations have been such that they're able to create better paints, better resources to buy art supplies. You also have a wealthy merchant class who want to buy work. And so things are going well here. The economy is going well. We see mostly from the Dutch Baroque things that are moral, right? Extreme detail, a lot of work that focuses on surfaces. I would kind of think about the Dutch Baroque as being somewhat similar to the Northern Renaissance. Again, same region, same area. So the first artist we're going to look at is Rembrandt. Rembrandt collected work from Dürer, and so we have that influence of Dürer's work. This is Self-Portrait with Saskia. And when you guys think about Rembrandt, if he comes up on the exam, he is an innovator, right? He's using different types of etching techniques, and he's kind of playing around here, coming up with new styles. He's not just doing stuff that's been done before. So if we think all the way back to Dürer's Adam and Eve, it's an engraving. Then we saw Lucas Cranach the Elder, who did Allegory of Long Grace. That's a woodcut. Okay, this is an etching. An etching is going to be etching into a piece of metal with acid. And you can see these marks are really black. That shows he's really scraping through that wax surface. Okay, and he is also making bolder, dark values by creating a lot of cross-hatching close together. So proximity and pressure to be able to create work that has this much value. He's also playing with the idea of space, right? He's putting Saskia in the background, and he's trying to get that sense of depth by etching her lighter. And so you would definitely want to talk about this kind of new approach to printmaking. Remember, he was very prolific. This is a marriage portrait, which is a pretty typical theme. And so we have a lot of his pieces and a lot of portraiture. So we talked about the etching process there. Vermeer. Now, Vermeer was one of the samples they gave you for the AP exam, so I doubt it's going to be on the exam. But Vermeer is a great example of a Dutch painter because he's painting with great attention to texture, small, moral scenes, Remember, he has the hidden light source, that emphasis on the yellow and gold. We have the judgment scene behind her head. It's a quiet domestic space. Rachel Roush. I don't think this has ever been on an AP exam either, so this might be a good one to know. So Rachel Roush is obviously a woman. She is painting from studies that she draws of different insects, preserved insects, animals, and fruits and vegetables, foods, and flowers. So her dad was a scientist and he collected different samples, different specimens. And so she would draw them. This work is seen as kind of a fall theme because it's showing produce that was harvested in the fall. It also has kind of a life or death theme here because you can see that everything in this image will has a shelf life. It will eventually decompose. And then you also have this kind of tense moment between the lizard and the butterfly, right? So a lot of content to discuss in this work. Remember, this is a context time period where they are really interested in taxonomy. They're really interested in ordering the sciences. And so that fits perfectly with what she's doing. The microscope had just been invented. Extreme detail and realism, playing with the idea of balance in her composition. Lots to look at there. All right, Spanish Baroque. This is Las Meninas, the Maidens, from Diego Velázquez. It's a giant painting, and remember that we're likely seeing the painting here that we're looking at. So we're seeing the back of the painting that he's painting, which is Las Meninas. He being Diego Velázquez, and then we have his maiden, or the maidens are the attendants of little Margarita. Here's Margarita, her nun and tutor in the back, her faithful dog, and then her parents, King Philip and Isabella, being reflected in the mirror there. So this was a commission by the king made for his study. He asked for a painting of the princess, and Velázquez gave him a painting of himself painting the princess. So artist is genius. And the last Baroque we're going to look at happened much later because England is an island and things happen there at a little different time when you don't have global communication. So this is Tête-à-Tête from the Marriage a la Mode series. So here's the whole series. It is a series of paintings that were turned into prints so that they could be owned by more people. So remember, a painting, there's only one of, but prints you can make multiple. So these were turned into prints for people to be able to collect the series. They tell the made-up story of the Squanderfields, who obviously squandered their money, and then the Duke, who had the societal position. And so you have this story of money, marrying for money or marrying for social position, right? And it doesn't go well. Syphilis gets involved and it's a lot of mess. So there's a lot of interesting story here with Hogarth's work. So thinking about British identity, society, there's the collection of prints. Kind of, it's satire, kind of mocking this new rich class. All right, we've made it all the way to colonial Americas. So we're looking here at a piece that is about the Aztec, made under the direction, okay, of European friars who actually came over, these monks actually came over from Europe and taught the Aztecs how to create with this media so that they could make a book all about themselves, the Aztecs. So this work was meant to be presented to Charles V of Spain. It never made it because it got stolen off a ship by pirates and ended up in France. So this book is all about converging cultures, but it is the record of the Aztec told forcibly by the Spanish, making them tell their story, right? It's an all about the Aztec book, Aztec for Dummies. So remember with our calendar stone at the Templo Mayor, it had that cyclical, right, that new fire ceremony. We talked about those 51 glyphs that went around for the 52-year new fire ceremony. Well, here they are. But because this is made under the direction of the Europeans, they did it in a linear way, because in the Western world, we think about time as being more linear, not cyclical. Okay, it's a different approach. This is a book, so it's a codex, right? A bound book of pages where frontispiece just means the front page, the title page, if you will. This is a very simplified map of Tenochtitlan with the eagle and the Nepal's cactus in the middle, right? Talking about the importance of their creation story with the Aztec. This book contained all different stories and information about their clothing, their diet, their king lineage, all those things. Again, it was supposed to get back, it was commissioned by the viceroy, supposed to get back to the king of Spain. So it's similar to the Bayeux Tapestry in the sense that it was made to document something by the victors, right? Forcing the losers to make the object. It has writing on it in French because, again, the French King Henry's cosmographer wrote on it. We talked about Tenochtitlan, the city built on the water. And we talked about the creation story. I think there was something else I was going to mention. No, I guess not. Okay. Oh, y'all know how I feel about this piece. So this is our angel with the arquebus. Just watch this beyond the exam. Don't write that your teacher doesn't like it. That would be rude. All right, so we're looking at a work that is in the style of the La Paz school out of Bolivia. This is a painting that's very typical in Peru, post-conquest in Peru. And it's this androgynous angel holding an arquebus. And the arquebus is an early muzzle-loaded firearm. And guns here are, of course, a symbol for power. This would be something that would not exist in the New World until in the Americas until colonization. It represents the celestial in the sense that this is an angel, right? An angel of God. The aristocracy, right? The wealth, and that's shown through the clothing, and then the military with the weapon, right? So at this point in time, Catholicism is being forced on the people of the Americas. And this is to make that Christianity look more appealing, because maybe you could be like an angel with a gun, right? Part of a series. These were often in churches. And then parts of it, like the feathers in the hat, relate back to some indigenous gods to kind of make the indigenous people feel a little bit more comfortable with this new religion that they had to be. Mannerism is definitely the style. It's got that kind of swoop to the body. It's very decorative, opulent. All right, so the screen is double-sided. It is an object that is a room divider. This was owned by the viceroy in Mexico. We looked at the picture. He's the one with the cross eyes and the really long nose. The siege of Belgrade is on one side. The hunting scene is on the other. So it had a masculine and a feminine side. The masculine side was the siege. This is the feminine side we're looking at right here. One of the most interesting things about this work is the fact that it is shell inlaid. And so all those little parts that look kind of white or silver, that's inlaid shell into a wooden screen. This is a fabulous example of converging cultures, right? Because we have a style that is Japanese, a form that is Japanese, telling the story from West Europe in the New World in Mexico. So a lot happening together there. And this is half of it is in Brooklyn and half of it is in Mexico, right? So some of the things: political power, converging cultures, decorative art. Another example of an encanchado, both of these. Encanchado just means shell inlay. So this is the Virgin of Guadalupe by Gonzalez, and we talked about how it is based on, this is not the miraculous. The miraculous one is in the Basilica of Guadalupe, where Juan Diego was visited by Our Lady of the Guadalupe, the Virgin Mary. This is a copy, a true copy. So these true copies were made to kind of show that story, and it tells the story in these medallions around the outside. So these medallions around the outside actually tell the story of the Virgin appearing to Juan Diego. The shell inlaid frame, right? And then the work itself is a piece of canvas stretched over wood, shell inlaid and oil painted. So Our Lady of the Guadalupe is really a fabulous way for Catholicism to become more appealing to the indigenous people by making a native Virgin Mary. There's the original. Some people say that she presented herself as the Lady of the Apocalypse, maybe. You can see in this picture some really good sheen on those pieces of shell. So that's mother of pearl shell. And there's some more of the story of when she appeared to Juan Diego, who has now become a saint, and the basilica was built at the site of the story. And lastly, this is the end of content area 3, I think, yes, is our Spaniard and Indian produce a mestizo. This work was about taxonomy in a strange way. So when we talked about how in the Dutch Baroque era, they were interested in, that's the same time period, right? They were interested in how different species mix. This is a very racist, sad interpretation, but it shows this kind of racial purity that is being discussed at this point in time. It's really terrible thing. And so this would be part of a series of a casta or caste painting showing social caste. These were labeled with what ethnicities made up each family. They were very much I already said racist, derogatory oftentimes in the way that they depict non-Spaniards, indigenous people, and then they have all these symbols in them. So like the clothing that each is wearing is very much like a stereotype of their ethnicity. And so it's made with all these like symbols and stereotypes that reinforce these so cultural norms or identifiers. Oftentimes, I mean, these are usually fictitious, but oftentimes these were done for viceroys to show ethnic mixing. We talked about how this could relate to the idea of the Enlightenment. Parts of the Enlightenment kind of deal with this concept of purity. Examples of casta paintings. They come in different styles. Usually there's 16 in a casta painting, and they go from the least mixed race to the most mixed race at the bottom. Actually, it's not even really, they go from most European to least European. And it rates them by how civilized they are. This is awful. This is not good, but this is what they were doing at the time. Talked about that. All right, so we just did the end of content area 3. So the last series of reviews I'm going to make for you guys is about content area 4. Remember that content area 4 is our largest content area, like 54 images, I think, but we'll get through them in no time, and it should all be a review anyway, unless you just missed a day. So that will be next. I'm going to do that in several different reviews. So this is review 7. If you haven't watched the other 6, I would do it. If you have not watched the FRQ breakdown, get with it and watch it. Miss you guys. Wish we were doing this in person. Sadly.